All right, this is the Finance Committee, August 12th, 2015. We are being televised. Our first order of business, we have a new member. We are now up to our full complement of 9. Mark Lamb was voted in at a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee at the end of July. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You want to tell us a little bit about what you do and where you're from?
My name is Mark Lamb. I am from Easton, born and raised. I've been here about 30 years, with the exception of 5 years living in Rainham. Moved back, and my wife and I decided to raise our family here. My wife is also a lifelong resident. I currently work for a company out of Stoughton called Tools Unlimited, sales and marketing. But as I said before, my background in operations for 8 years is what I believe makes me qualified for the board. I look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay,
So I'm going to interrupt a good idea if everybody introduces themselves to
Yes.
Mark in case he doesn't know who anybody is.
Okay, so I'm Greg Frazier.
Mike Petrosky.
Ben, you know me.
Elaine, you know me.
Jack Waxman.
She's our secretary, chief bottle washer, keeps us in line.
Very important. Somebody has to.
Okay, our next order of business is we need to assign some representatives to other committees for fiscal year 16. We filled one of those positions at our last meeting due to a request from Wendy, the town accountant, for the audit committee, and we selected Jason for that. We have to appoint somebody to capital planning, and that's been Jack. Are you still interested?
I can do it, or if someone else wants to break into something, that'd be fine with me too.
Anyone else interested in serving on the capital planning?
What are the other committees? Just, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead. But,
No, it's just capital planning and budget.
oh, okay.
What's the nights on that?
Capital planning, Jack, can you speak to when they capital
They
planning?
meet just several times a year. You know, they do it in the months before the town meeting. And what they essentially do are going through all the capital requests by all the town departments and putting them in order that we should, that we'd like to see them. It's an advisory post in that no one has to follow the order. The town council is perfectly capable of overruling it and doing anything they feel like, but it's the order that a group of about, I think it's like 6 or 7 people from from various backgrounds think the town would like to address things. And sometimes we may decide that, okay, they want this, the department wants this, but they have other sources of funding. Maybe they should put up some of the money, the town put up the rest, things like that. But for the most part, it's you get the list, you get the presentations of what everyone's looking for and why. You make your decisions, and you probably never hear about it again.
They basically usually tell you approximately how much money
No, they do not tell you. They say how much things cost. They don't tell you what the total amount the town has available.
Oh, sometimes they do.
I asked. I specifically asked. I said, "Well, can someone tell me what the amount we plan to borrow is, so that we can see roughly how far down the list we should bother going?" And nope, we can't tell you that. So.
Okay. Well then.
And when does it meet? In the evenings, during the day?
It meets in the evenings. It meets, this year there were about 4 or 5 meetings, one a week for several weeks until we came up with the finished list.
Okay.
And then it was over.
Is it like on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
It's definitely not Wednesday, because it would have conflicted with this. It's another 7 o'clock meeting. I don't remember what day of the week.
2
it
years
was.
ago, when I was on it, it was Tuesdays, but I don't know if that has,
Tuesdays would not work.
yeah, if that has continued or not. I know it, and it was all Tuesdays when I
It-
was on it.
It may have been Tuesday, but it is mainly just talking with everyone and getting, working with people to come up with a common agenda for the town.
I couldn't do Tuesdays.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you're willing to do it, I think you'd add more value on that.
Well, I don't know how much value I have this year, but I'd be perfectly willing to do it, but I'd also be willing to let anyone else who wants to take a shot at it do it too. So if nobody else wants it, I'll take it. If someone wants it, I'll be glad to transfer it, and no one really has to make up their mind until much later in the year.
Since it presumably will be starting soon.
It'll start because
of-
there'll be another town meeting, because this year we put off all the capital,
For the fall.
right,
Yeah.
because town was having a little bit of a budget crisis.
With that in mind, I would like to make a motion to appoint Jack to the Capital Planning Committee.
All right, any second? Mike will second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Jack serving on capital planning? Any opposed?
Can I vote against it? No.
Any
That would look
abstentions?
good, Jack.
Are you abstaining, Jack?
No, I'm not.
Okay, you'll vote in favor of yourself. All right, it's unanimous. That leaves the Budget Subcommittee. Budget Subcommittee is a committee made up of representatives from Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the School Committee, the Superintendent. Is he ex officio or is he a voting
No, if he's a
member?
voting member, I believe.
What about Marilyn?
Yep, business manager is.
She's a
yep,
voting
yep,
member?
as
Okay.
far as I know.
Wendy isn't,
Right, correct.
because Wendy doesn't live with, oh, no,
Does not live in town.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wendy, the town accountant, she's ex officio, so is David, correct?
right, correct.
The town administrator serves on it. And basically, it serves as a, what would you call it? A conduit for the various major boards within the town, school finance and selectmen, to discuss budgetary issues. We had a meeting this afternoon, which Elaine will discuss later, regarding the override rumblings that have been going through town. In the past, during this past winter, we discussed various options in and around how to handle the snow removal budget, and how it affected the budget going forward. The Budget Subcommittee meets once a month. I don't think we deviated from that schedule, did we?
I think
What did we go
going
every-
up to town meeting, again, it probably averaged once a month, but there's nothing that I
Yeah.
don't think limits.
It's not
it
like
to that.
us where where it meets every week. It's kind of, it might go to like every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks during heightened seasons. Usually does not meet once town meeting has happened. Today's meeting was kind of special in the regard of the subject matter. Due to start up again, when did he say, September?
Yep,
With the preliminary items. It does meet during the day. We've been meeting on Thursday afternoons. Usually it was like 2, but today's was at 1. It all depends on the schedules of those that are involved. Given, currently Elaine and I sit on the committee, given that the importance of the budget as well as the pending discussion surrounding the override, it is my feeling that at least one of us should be one of the representatives. We have 2 representatives to that committee. Is there anyone else who has an interest or would be available to serve on the budget subcommittee? Okay, seeing no interest then, I'm still interested. I know Elaine is
I'm
still interested. I will entertain a motion to reappoint Elaine and myself.
I'll make the motion.
Jack moves.
Second.
Mike will second. Any discussion? All those in favor? It is unanimous. Okay. Moving on, budget responsibilities. We did discuss this at our last meeting, where we did assign Greg and Jason. Jason is another new member to the, he was elected at the most recent election. He could not make it tonight. We did some budgetary assignments, and now it's your turn, Mark.
I think what we did, if I recall correctly, and based on what I've written here, we did not reassign Scott McLennan's
Right.
with the idea that perhaps the new person would be willing to do those. So the budgets that Scott looked at, he's a member who went off the committee in March. He did the selectmen's budget, the finance committee, not much of a budget, as you can imagine, the reserve fund, and the town accountant.
Okay. So what is involved in,
Okay, you'll see this in a minute when we go over it on a monthly basis. Normally, we look at we get the fiscal report, the financials, and you look at your department budgets, see if they're in line, anything seem out of the ordinary, do they have enough remaining, et cetera. And then when we're in budget season, either they make presentations, or in some cases you talk to them, you just make an appointment and go and look at what they're proposing for a budget, what items on there might or might not be discretionary, and basically report back to the committee when we're making our budget recommendations.
Okay.
So
okay,
it's really not too, the ones obviously that would be the reserve fund, which is, we have some say over that. The town accountant would be the one that would be the most involved of those budgets, and of course Wendy's quite available. But in terms of her budget, it's pretty cut and dried for the most part, and obviously she can explain quite well whatever she has to do on it.
Okay.
Okay, so those will be
Okay.
yours, and everybody else know who they're watching, and, okay?
Which is a nice segue into we had on the agenda June and/or July financial reports. Wendy has been busy with the encumbrances, and those reports are not quite ready yet. We do have the Mays, and I believe Elaine has a few.
We had received them back before
Yeah.
around the time of our last meeting. So May would have been 1 month basically remaining in the year. So what I did is I printed out the report, and I just went through in terms of what the collections looked like. And the collections in most cases were at 100% or more. So, personal property taxes, real estate taxes were at 98%. So, motor vehicle excise was 106. It's always nice when you collect more than what you had anticipated. So, everything was in the 90s, if not in excess. So the collections were excellent, up to that point. So I also looked at the budgets that I'm responsible for. I just I eyeballed everything. The Finance Committee still had 30% left. I think, Stacy, I don't know if that was after we signed your last one, probably not, but I think we're okay. But everyone else at this point, the end of May, had, 10, 11, 15%. So for the most part, people were in good shape. The one glaring exception to that was snow and ice removal, which was a negative 461.6. Way in the hole, no surprise whatsoever. That's based on what had been budgeted, obviously, last year. So that was no surprise whatsoever.
That should actually be further in the hole.
Well, that's what it says here as of May. So there may have been, that may have taken some, no, it doesn't indicate adjustments here. So
No, 400%.
Or
It was what,
461%.
180, and it was almost 900, almost a million.
Right,
So
so
that
we-
would put it, yeah, that would be about 400% in the hole.
But it should be more than $600,000 off. Well, you said 400 something thousand dollars? That's not enough.
No, 461%.
Oh, 460, I'm
above
sorry,
their-
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, above their budget.
I know I'm arguing in favor of
Yeah.
bigger short.
Yeah, yeah, the number.
400% over their
yeah.
budget.
Yeah, no, the number was correct.
And
yeah.
what's the number, what's the budget this year compared to
It went
last
up
year?
to 300 and, they added $300,000 to it or something?
They're working on getting it up to 500,000. I don't know what I think he moved it up to 3 for FY16, and then
Right,
probably for
which is not indicated on this one. It was at least 3, it might have been 350.
maybe.
Right,
And then move it up to 500 in FY17.
right. Gradually move in that direction.
Right,
so.
because as we're paying.
Hopefully, last
as we're,
year's was an anomaly, the
yeah.
degree to which it was over, but that remains to be seen.
Give you quick tutorial, if you're not familiar with how the snow and ice budget works. It is the only budget item that is, you're really allowed to overspend on it. And it was only budgeted for like, what was it, 180?
$188,000.
Because,
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, you
I was say,
can tell them the punchline why it is where it is.
because once you raise it, you can never lower it.
Right.
And so since you can overspend on it, kind of keep it a little bit low. And then on the years, such as this year, when you go over, you have to somehow allow for it, and usually it's in the next, in the budgetary cycle.
If you don't use it all, does it carry over?
No, it goes into free cash.
Free
Yeah,
cash.
Free cash. So it's staying-
Anything left over in the budget at the end of the fiscal year goes into free cash unless the town meeting, votes, which they do sometimes, to move it like from free cash to something else.
Is that something that could be changed?
It is, and we are. Or as far as what?
Carrying over?
No.
No.
No, because for all intents and purposes, you're sort of kind of carrying it over because it goes into free cash. And a lot of times when there is an overage in snow and ice, that money
where
gets
money
taken
comes
out of free cash. That's
As
one
well
of-
as a
one of
number
the
of other
buckets
items too, though.
that they, I'm sorry?
As well as a number of other.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
A few other ways to do it. And I guess Wendy and David had started discussions even before Snowmageddon about raising it, because over the last, I think, 5 years or so, we had been averaging about $500,000 in the snow and ice. So then, of course, we got hammered this past winter, and we spent almost $900,000 on snow and ice removal. It was looking very dicey as far as how we were going to make up that deficit. Fortunately, up at the State House, they passed a special rule. I don't think it was an actual law, but I think they passed rules that are allowing cities and towns to amortize this year's snow and ice costs over the next 3 fiscal years. So we are taking advantage of that, and at the same time slowly increasing the snow and ice budget line item, so that we're getting to within the more recent historical trends. If we get a winter like we had about 20 years ago, where it was 75 degrees in January, we'll have an overage, but that money will go into free cash,
Which is fine.
which is fine.
Fine.
I mean, it's
Nobody
always,
has any issue with that.
always nice to have a little bit extra
Right.
lying around.
So it's either really good or really bad.
I'm sorry?
It's either really good or really bad.
Yeah,
And last year was pretty bad.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just so you know, the old budget was $188,700, and the budget for this year is $388,000.
Oh, okay, he upped it by 200,000, okay. Thank you.
That's considerable.
Yeah, right.
It's
And-
nothing.
and they-
Yeah, it's nothing.
Well, from where it was,
Right.
it's
Oh,
yeah.
considerable.
Yes, it's more than double.
Right.
Exactly.
What it is since it's the only account that you're going to overrun, the tendency is if you want to balance a budget, you don't put any money in snow and ice
Right.
because you can overrun it later. So you can balance the budget by not assigning money to it.
But after like
Then you
that,
start playing the shell game.
Yeah, you're just playing,
afterwards.
you're playing a numbers
Playing
game
a
there. I mean,
but after, the average for 4 or 5 years being closer to 500, it makes sense that it's going to be
Yeah.
more like that. So anyway, there was, and I know we haven't had a regular meeting for a couple of months. We had a couple of joint meetings, but there was a question when I did the April financial reports. It looked like the Council on Aging, et cetera, was running a big deficit, particularly in terms of pay. So I did speak to Kristen Kennedy, who's the interim director of the Council on Aging, and expressed to her the concern of the Finance Committee that she was working for nothing for the last 2 or 3 months, which she did laugh about that. What the answer, and I knew it was tied in with this, some of the Council on Aging and the salaries, particularly of the drivers, are paid by grants. And because, as you recall, the town accountant was out sick for a bit, there was a little snafu there. The grants had come in, but they hadn't officially been transferred from whatever account they go into when they come in, into her budget. So it looked like the money was all spent and they weren't going to get paid. But in fact, she was not concerned, and she did appreciate our concern about the fact that she was working hard and not getting paid. So it was all set, and in fact, of course, I checked that, and as of May, everything was in order, and in fact, she had like 12% of her budget left, and so everything was fine. So in general, I did not see anything in the May financials that was a red flag in any way. It looked pretty decent. So again, speaking to Wendy, she'll make sure that, well, they will be done anyway, but that we have them prior to the next meeting. So when you get them, what you're going to be looking at, your departments and just in general, did they have money, did they run out, did they have money left over, kind of getting a sense, going into FY16, how they did for the year. So I think that's where we're at.
Okay. And again, once we do get the June and July reports, we will forward them to the rest of the committee. Reports from other boards and committees. We had a charter committee meeting at 6. We actually had a couple meetings a few meetings within the interim. Do you want to address them, Elaine?
Yes, well, we've had probably 3 charter committee meetings since we last met to basically get the final items cleared up. It's been a lot of editing, and we had one meeting with the town attorney, Jay Tallerman, that was basically looking at legalities and things. He had gone through the whole thing, and some things he'd come up with were questions, some in fact were legalities. Colleen Corona had spoken by phone, a conference call with a couple of people from the Collins Center, who was kind of our director in this project. So on July 27th, we had what was supposed to be our final meeting to get all our editing done, and then we actually presented it in a joint meeting prior to our joint finance committee meeting. We presented it to the Board of Selectmen, with the understanding that there were a couple of wording edits that would come. So at this point, the revised charter, proposed charter, is in the hands of the Board of Selectmen. We did again have a brief meeting just before this, and it was the last couple of editing things that, again, Colleen had spoken with Jay Tullerman to check out a couple of things. So it is all set at this point. My understanding from the joint meeting is that the Board of Selectmen, now it's in their hands. They're going to have, I believe it's at least 2 public hearings. And, you know, the chair of the Board of Selectmen, Dan Murphy, felt that nothing should happen in terms of that until September, because clearly people are away in the summer. So I would expect that right after the beginning of September, we'll see, you know, something posted, advertised, you know, in terms of at least the first, if not a couple of dates for meetings to go over the charter, which I also assume they'll publish, you know, that information.
The Colleen did publish the draft, and I want to say the notes that she had passed out in her email. I don't have that. Yeah, I think, yeah, it was Word doc. She did post them to the town website.
To the website, okay.
So it's out there if people wanted to read it. I want to hold off on the budget subcommittee meeting just because it's going to be rather, I think it'll be rather lengthy discussion. Anything from capital planning?
No.
Okay. Jason's not here, so I don't know if there's been anything on audit,
I
so.
think there was a meeting because, like you mentioned earlier, that was the reason that we made a decision on that at the last meeting before we had a full complement, because Wendy wanted
Right.
to have a meeting of the audit committee and needed, you know, to have the rep from the finance committee present. So that's why we made that move at the time. So I assumed that they met, but
Yeah, Jason can let us know. All right, so we had a budget subcommittee meeting this afternoon. Elaine?
okay, obviously, everyone who's been on Finance Committee is aware of the fact that there's been an email campaign for a while. Back in the spring, winter and spring, when we were dealing with the deficit in the snow and ice, the idea of an override had come up at the budget subcommittee. It was not felt that for the FY16 budget that there was sufficient time to do anything, you know, along those lines, and that was not the way to go, and so other measures were taken to deal with the budget. But there has been an initiative out there since then where members of the community, particularly with a view towards schools, but not necessarily exclusively, have been contacting, you know, Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, et cetera, with the idea that it's time to think about working toward an override. So with that in mind, the Budget Subcommittee decided that rather than wait until the fall, which normally would be our next meeting in preparation for the special town meeting that is scheduled for, not yet scheduled, but will be proposed for the fall, that we needed perhaps to meet during the summer and get a sense of kind of where people were at. So that meeting took place today. There were a number of members of the public, you know, some members of the Board of Selectmen that were present at the meeting. And so the way it went, David Colton talked about, you know, just to make sure that everybody understood where things were, that the difference between a debt exclusion override, which is one that, you know, once the debt is paid off, the override goes away. So usually that's used for like buildings and things of that nature. And then an operational override, which is one that increases the tax levy, so more than the 2.5% in new growth. It's an addition to the tax levy that's permanent. It's on top of what's already there. So anything, you know, to do with school operations would be an operational override. So, you know, that was really as a kind of a background information, and, you know, with the idea that if you're looking for an operational override, the direction that you need to go is what what do you need to accomplish? And what will it cost to accomplish that? So that was the basis of the discussion today at our meeting. Since the impetus was not on the part of the school committee, but the focus that people have been writing about was an override for school operations, Dr. Keough, the superintendent, was at least prepared to talk about like things that he saw, the areas of need for the school department, which, without going into, a laundry list of particular things, he grouped under 4 categories: engaging families and community, with a team approach of how you deal with students and with families and with improving education, with social and emotional well-being, and he talked a bit about, the complexities of bringing up students at this time and the support programs that are needed. Resource efficiency, which is something that apparently he's been working on since he came, is how well do we use what we have already? And if we're not using it that well, how do we improve what we're doing? And then advancing student achievement, which of course is one of the focuses that people always look at in terms of school performance. So, he did go over some of the things that that have been out there in terms of what kinds of things would address these needs. One of the things is that, and it's one of the ones that people have been advocating for, is a full-day kindergarten. He mentioned specifically, and this will be something I know will appeal to Mike, the state mandates, and identifying what the state mandates are, and how they are increasing and how you need to meet them. So an example that he gave are the English language learner mandates, which are ever increasing. I know, because that was happening even before I retired, when I was still in education, what you have to provide for English language learners, et cetera. Large class sizes, apparently there's been some number of classes that are 32, 34 students, and that, it's essentially a disservice foreign language. They'd like to expand offerings, but also expand where it's taught. And, if the elementary level, and, if you know anything about optimum language learning, that's where it is starting in elementary. So, that is something that they would like to do. He identified the special ed process, and his background is, which actually is a fortunate thing in terms of meeting mandates, in special education. And I know when I had met with him back in the spring with regard to the school department budget, it was something that he mentioned, particularly even then. The establishment of programs that keep your kids in-house instead of tuitioned out to other districts or to other programs, which costs not only the tuition, but the transportation, which can be as much or more than the tuition. So, those programs, and you can't 100% meet the needs of every kid. You're always going to have some that just are beyond what you can handle in-house, but there are a lot of situations, if you've got the programs, that you can handle in-house. And, as he mentioned, it's more efficient and better for kids. Most parents would rather have their kids be in their school system with people that they live, they're members of the town, than sent out to another town who happens to have a program. So those are things he's looking at. In addition, one way, and this was something that he had mentioned when we were reviewing the school budget, that he wanted to put in, and there were no funds to do it, is special ed coordinators at each school, so that they're making sure that services are provided and integrated, and that the teaching staff has the support that they need to be able to provide those services, so that they don't get to the point that the kids are being sent out because the school isn't meeting their needs.
Sort of like a compliance officer type.
Yes, that's part of it. You know, and who will chair meetings and do all the requirements that special education has. Professional development for staff,
Which is mandated by law.
mandated by law. And he mentioned, you know, some programs that are out there, enrichment type programs. I'm familiar with at least one of them, the International Baccalaureate program. There's apparently another one called Global Scholars that I'm not familiar with, but these are programs that meet the needs of, you know, students who are gifted or advanced, or so. Something that you know, as finance committee members, we've dealt with in the past. He specifically mentioned technology, and that it's not just making X amount of technology available. You know, to put a smart board in the classroom, if people don't know what to do with it, then you haven't accomplished anything. So the need to have integration specialists so that they can work with staff on how to effectively use the tools that they have. He identified, and people were actually quite surprised, the need for a health curriculum at the high school level, and I think
didn't know that.
that there is nothing at the high school level in terms of health, and without getting into, you know, things going on in town, I think we're all well aware of some of the crises situations within our town and every other town, you know, in terms of risks and what students are encountering, and, you know, what the results of, you know, getting into bad situations can be. The other thing he mentioned, not enough nurses. There is one nurse per 1,000 students. And, you know, as just the situations you deal with in the building, and again, from my own experience being there, and also, you know, if you have more programs that you can keep in-house, that also kind of compounds that situation because you have more medical issues. So, and this came up from someone else, but one of the things that's really not a money issue, but something to think about, is the opening times of buildings, which apparently a lot of towns are dealing with, where the elementary kids start the latest and the high school kids start the earliest, and in reality, in terms of what's good for kids, apparently, not that there aren't complications, but it should be the reverse. And so that was kind of connected in with the health. So those were the school, and there was a lot of discussion that followed up on that. That is not to say that this would be the only, you know, that it would be the only part of it, but it's just that, of course, he was prepared with that kind of information. Yes?
I'm going to state publicly that I'm 100% for education. And for the record, I serve on the school committee at the Southeast Regional. And I think one of the key things that I think would help sell the school budget, and as you know, from time to time I would bring it up as a comment, I think the superintendent and the school committee should really mandate zero-based budgeting, line by line. When we did it at the Southeast Regional 5 years ago, now granted, people are going to say it's a vocational school. Yes, it is. It is different, true. But the concept is still the same. So if you take a sheet of paper, you put the English department, you put the name, salaries, and the masters and the levels, all that. You break it out item by item. It's public record. It's public record. And so that way there, when you do the line by line, then the taxpayers are going to say, well, that's a contract. That's a fixed cost, right? These are state, federal mandates, unfunded mandates, special education mandates, fuel, energy, and all that. So when you put it all together, it's really not much left. And I think after, with the experience we had at the Southeast Regional this past year, as you know, the enrollment went up 14%, and then we got hit with a discovery by the Massachusetts audit that we have to do a retirement funding, which is about approximately $500,000 a year additional on top. Yeah, and it created some concern, if I'm correct. But yet, because we were able to do the line-by-line budget item, zero-based budget, and to show each year, because as you've seen the budget, we put 2 years ago, past year, this year, so you are seeing how this is going. It gave, I believe, in my own opinion, more support when it came to that unexpected cost. And I know that I think if the Easton School Department would do basically the same thing and try to get the budget in a month earlier instead of 2 weeks before a town meeting.
2 weeks? Never saw it 2 weeks.
But at least I think that would be self-explanatory with the new superintendent, what he wants to do with some of the programs that I think he would get a better.
Well, Jack, I have a question. I just wanted to point out that to that point, Mike, I did speak at the meeting and stated that if something like this is going to move forward, whoever is going to do it needs to be able to show at least a return on investment. Now, I know it's a little bit, it's kind of abstract. I mean, about the only concrete thing you could point to would be increased test scores. I mean, it's not like when you're going to, if you're putting new windows or insulation into your house, your fuel bill is going to go down. But my whole point was, if you're going to do this, you need to be able to show the people who either don't have kids in the school district or who have kids and don't think an override is necessary. This is what you're going to get. This is why we're asking for this amount of money. Jack, did you have a question?
Well, more
comment.
More comment. I've seen a couple of previous overrides, and looking at the emails that we've been getting, most of them seem to be themed around education, and most of those seem to be themed around full-day kindergarten. I do know that when you do an override, in most cases, it sort of opens the floodgates. Everyone needs money. I've heard David say he wants to redo Frothingham Hall. I mean, there are not picking on that, but there are all kinds of things that need to be done. And I would prefer that if we go for an override, that we actually pick, a couple of big projects that the town feels need doing, and do those, and not just say, here's a lump of money, let's try and please everybody and spread it out so thin that nothing discernible happens.
Well, David did mention that as far as on the town side, the DPW, there's some stuff over there. The whole building.
We need two new schools in the near.
I mean, the schools are going to be looking at severe renovations, if not replacement of a couple of buildings. I'm sure the chiefs would like to see increased equipment and staffing levels.
There's a fire department building that probably needs renovation or replacement.
It is, you're right, it is more than just the schools, even though this is coming from the schools, or I should not, it's not coming from the school department, it's coming from parents, it's, the focus seems to be on the schools. Everyone needs to keep in mind that is more than just the schools within this town. Everybody and I actually kind of suggested that at the meeting, that we use the budget subcommittee as a conduit to have the discussions that if something like this is going to happen, let's bring everybody together, put it all on the table, and cherry pick. Now, to Dr. Keogh's credit, he did say that, he knows this is, pie in the sky. Not pie in the sky, but I mean, this is his wish list. But they need to prioritize it. And he did admit that it is still very, very early in the discussion. For myself, I'm glad to see that the discussion is starting. I just hope that it can maintain a civil attitude. Because you know how these things can degenerate.
Well, what I don't want to see is like when they do budget, okay, everything's going to go up 3% this year. So everything goes up 3%. Does everything need 3%? Is everything worth 3%? Could you go up 6 here and 2 here somewhere else?
Well, part of the discussion today too was the fact that that the way, you know, as the discussion goes forward, you know, if there is to be, you know, a proposal for an override, there needs to be, you know, what's the goal? There needs to be information. What is the goal? What would it cost? And what's the result that people could expect to see? So very, you know, specifics that show that. And, you know, there was acknowledgement in general. Again, the impetus, if you will, has come from a group of or some number of parents, but even they acknowledge that they know that schools aren't, you know, that happens to be their focus, but that schools aren't the only part of the town. So, you know, again, this was literally the preliminary first discussion that happened this afternoon as a kind of start, put it out there. There can only be an override proposal put out by the Board of Selectmen. So it's something that the Board of Selectmen will have to decide on. And again, I don't believe they're planning to discuss it in their next meeting.
No, they said
I believe they said.
Again, another thing for September, because their August meetings are pretty well booked anyway.
So that, you know, that will go on the Board of Selectmen agenda at some point whenever their meeting is, their next meeting in September. So, anything else do you think
I
I've
think we
covered?
pretty much covered it.
But if I may add one more.
Sure.
Again, I'm 100%, I like the new superintendent. I like when he made the presentation, he had a lot of good ideas, a good focus, and a good direction. But I would say again, if they would do a line-by-line, zero-based budgeting format, because once you start that, then you have a base to go with, and then each year is just an adjustment here or there. But I do believe if it was done that way, and we had more time to look at it, I think he would get more support.
We will lobby for that this year.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think that would need to happen too, you know, in a sense, if there were an override petition, it would require that, because there isn't any way that you could, you know, go to the public without providing that's the information, or certainly a starting point for the information.
So, yeah, you mentioned it'd be difficult to measure like any type of outcome from this. So I was just wondering, like, where the ideas came from for a special ed coordinator or integration specialist. Like, are there other communities that use them and that had success stories? Or
I'm sure that's, I don't know that we've ever heard definitive, this is why we need this is why we need, the only example that they put I guess you'd call it concrete evidence, is the full-day kindergarten, where if you look at all the students who have had trouble throughout, you know, or not succeeded, or, you know, not at the top, if you trace them all back, they didn't go to full-day kindergarten. So it does start there. There is, you know, and I get that, but I go back to what I said earlier, where I need to know what I'm being asked to spend my money on.
yes.
And that's only fair.
In regards to the technology component, if I remember it correctly, he was looking for like a multimedia IT chief or something like that. I am in full favor of that on several levels. One, the new security acts in the Massachusetts Commonwealth and the federal government require accountability, security of personal data, information, and someone has to be like a CIO. They have to do a strategic, the Ed Reform Act requires a state technology plan, which has to be submitted and approved by the school committee. And to be able to coordinate training mandates or in-house training on how to use the technology, because you'd be surprised that some schools, they get all this technology, but they don't know how to use it, and that has time on learning, classroom deficiencies, however you want to call it, because, you know, kids are a lot smarter today, and you have to maintain a certain level of understanding of technology, because let's look at it. I mean, when I was in school, we weren't on an internet or texting or whatever. It was pencil and typewriter, and typing teachers doing that, and whiteout and all that. So technology is a very integral part of education today, and the bottom line is if you don't have the students prepared when they leave middle school to high school and to go to college, they're not going to succeed if they don't have a common core based understanding of technology. Plus, you know, you buy a computer network server now, well, 6 months is obsolete already, and that, as we all know, budgets go 18 months in advance, so what you put in the budget now can either change up or down, or the models you decide to go for, well, that's no longer made, the configuration, and, you know, and technology is expensive. It is very expensive to maintain and to keep up to date on, because it's not like a private corporation. Well, all right, here's $1 million, go out and do it. And then there is a nonprofit group that raises money for technology for the Easton Public Schools called FEE. You know, so they help with that. And you know, the thing is, an iPad or whatever, a laptop, tablet, that's obsolete in a year. Right. You know, so that's a big responsibility, that's a big chunk of money. Then you got licenses, you got contracts, you got this. It's very encumbersome. So when he was talking about a position like that, that in my professional judgment and personal judgment would be a well-invested monies to hire someone to deal with all that and to deal with the regulations and requirements by state and federal mandates.
Like in all textbooks go into like ebook or
Exactly. And then there's virtual classrooms, and there's online courses. You know, everybody's starting to do that. In fact, we do some at the Southeast region. We tried an experiment at Stonehill College this summer. So, and plus, by doing online courses, let's say an athlete or a student's home for 3 or 4 months, well, they can go online and or watch a YouTube or Skype or whatever, you know, so that way they're not falling behind in their classwork and everything else. And so that position, if that was in the I would fully support that position alone, just on the requirements and tying into schools and all the other compliances that I'm coming up by. Yeah, with all the hacking and everything else going on, there's going to be more regulations on this coming out.
There's going to be more and not less.
Yeah, and considering personal security of information, medical records, and everything else. That's a big, big thing now. So that position I definitely would fully support.
All right, any other comments on any other boards and committees? All right, we have some minutes to review, and there is an edit to be made. We discussed it with Stacy already. On page 2, the second bullet down says precincts would be eliminated, not precincts themselves, but precinct representation on town council would be eliminated.
I make a motion to accept the minutes with the edit corrections.
Do I have a motion? Do I have a second? Jack seconds. Any discussion on that? All those in favor of approving the minutes as edited? It's unanimous. Okay, community participation, check. But before we adjourn, couple housekeeping items. Our October 14th meeting, of course, obviously we would make sure that we send this out when we send the agenda, but the October 14th meeting is going to be upstairs in the Mary Connolly room.
So we have a meeting September 9th, which is our next one. But then the one after that, they had asked us if we minded, so there must be some big meeting that they needed the big space for, so we said, fine, not a problem. And then we don't have one scheduled yet for November because the second Wednesday is November 11th. So hopefully by the time we have our next meeting, we might have a sense of when town meeting what the date for the proposed special town meeting is, and we can work with that in terms of deciding what makes sense, so, but that's where we're at this point, so.
And then finally, we are members of the Massachusetts Municipal Association, and they contacted us recently about the newly revised edition of the Finance Committee Handbook is now available. So we ordered a CD for everyone. So if you'd like a CD, I have them right here, and you can get them after the meeting. Anything else?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Let's let the new guy do it.
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor? We stand adjourned, or seat adjourned.